Hey guys, today we're going to talk about the Cold War, and I like to think of the Cold War kind of like a chess game. Our two big players, the United States and Soviet Union, don't directly engage each other, but they keep putting policies into place and competing with each other, either, militarily through fighting other wars, with education and science, with the space race, or economically. And so they have different pawns that they use, kind of like on a chessboard, in order to try and outdo each other and win the game. And we'll see who wins in the end. Okay, so we see after World War II that the Western powers are very worried about the spread of communism. There's a few solutions they have for this. One is the policy of containment, like, okay, we can't get rid of communism where it is, but if we just don't let it spread any further, then that'll be okay. And this means giving aid to countries that communism might come in and take over, or they might become communist, or becoming involved militarily. After World War II, the United States invest in Western Europe, known as the Marshall Plan, that they learned from the mistake of World War I and the debt situation, so they pump money into the economies of Western Europe so they don't become communist, and also so that they're able to pay back those debts. The Truman Doctrine, which President Truman came up with, basically was that they give any foreign aid to countries that, are fighting against communism. Again, kind of goes with the policy of containment. And we see alliances come about. NATO, North Atlantic Trade Organization, are the Western capitalist countries, and then the Warsaw Pact, the communist Eastern countries that make alliance systems against each other. So again, there's a lot of competition between the Soviet Union and the United States in science, with the space race, who can send a rocket to the moon first, who can land on the moon first, and then the atomic race. And there's a lot of worry because both countries have access to atomic weapons, and they just keep getting bigger and bigger, that, basically if they ever get into a war, it will be the end of civilization as we know it. And so, you can ask your grandparents about living through the Cold War and those worries of being attacked and just kind of being on alert for that. We see places of interaction in Korea. The United States support the South. The Chinese support the North Koreans. That war never really ends. Right now we have it kind of at a stalemate between North and South Korea, that here's the border and we won't pass it. Vietnam's another, but that was an interesting one because they weren't necessarily being supported or prompted by any other communist regime. The French didn't leave. They were dissatisfied with Western power, so they turned to communism. And so we didn't understand quite the politics there, but it was a place of intervention to stop communism. Guatemala was another place of intervention. The United Fruit Company, remember our good friends the United Fruit Company and their bananas, were worried about Soviets and socialist policy in Guatemala, and so the United States sends military reinforcements in, basically to help out a company. The CIA are going to come in and take out the leader and put in a leader who is a dictator and not good for the people, but good for our interests. And there's a lot of examples of that, where the United States took out leaders and put in leaders that weren't good for the people, but supported our interest. Cuba is another example of a place of interaction. The Cubans had a revolution. Communist leader comes in. They're trying to get support from Russia. The United States is worried about Castro and his leadership. They send in Cuban nationalists to, basically support them to go and invade Cuba and take out Castro, but they do so at night, but under a full moon, so they're caught and killed. This is known as the Bay of Pigs. And we also have the Cuban Missile Crisis, where, the Soviet Union is worried about missiles in Turkey too close to them, and so they send missiles to Cuba to threaten the United States, and the United States works out a deal with the Soviet Union to have those missiles go back. So again, we basically put in leaders that support us. These are known as banana republics. They are Latin American countries that the United States basically uses for their support. They support them economically, and they use them as pawns in the Cold War. We also see different areas in Africa where the United States and the Soviet Union try and basically find allies. The Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, and the United States is going to support Al-Qaeda, who is the resistance group. So we support Osama bin Laden, who will later come back and attack us, while, we're trying to get the Soviets out of Afghanistan. There are always consequences to decisions. If you don't learn anything else from history class, there are always consequences to decisions. During the 1980s, we see a decline in the Soviet Union and eventually the collapse. They start being more open and having less restrictions under Mikhail Gorbachev with his policy of glasnost and perestroika. Basically, openness, freer press, you can criticize the government now. We see rebellions against communist leaders in Eastern European countries. Again, we're lifting those restrictions. Eventually, the Berlin Wall will come down. We'll talk about the Berlin Wall in another video. But this was kind of the dividing point between the East and the West. And when it came down, it was the symbolic end of the Soviet Union and the Cold War. So that's it for Cold War. I'm going to do another video on kind of culture in the Soviet Union and the United States, and we'll talk about the Berlin Wall more then. I'll see you next time.